or how are you going to work this?
Um, we'll turn it over to Courtney. I just want to say that the presentation that you're going to see required a lot of work and it's a tremendous amount of detail involved. But in essence, what it's done, it's rectified the initial ask that we had when we presented the budget a month or so ago, from the full 13 million to the city to something down, not that the total number changed, but the allocation portion to the city would be down to about $9 million. And the reason for that is the utilization of the, I'm going to call it COVID money against items in the budget that we can apply to, which is certainly a benefit and a practical thing to do because it does take the burden off of the city and ultimately the taxpayers. But I think, I'm not sure what part of the schedule is, you're going to see something here where we estimated the effects of our budget going out 4 or 5 years. And you're going to see the size of these numbers with certain assumptions we've made. And with one exception, we don't have built into these assumptions the academy costs. So any of the numbers that you see are going to be substantially increased. And I say substantially because I think the carrying cost of the academy is going to be high. But ultimately, I think this is a turning point in Danbury's education where we as a board, and going forward, you as a board, can no longer work alone. These numbers are too large, too drastic. They change too quickly because of uncontrollable events they have. And at least with this forecast we have, it's going to be a united front going ahead to get funding on behalf of the Board of Ed, both by the city government as well as the Board of Education. And I firmly think you're not only going to be able to get it from the state, but I think eventually you're going to have to petition the federal government because this one-shot infusion that the government has given us now is like jump-starting the economy. All they've done was given us some money to jumpstart the schools for next year without any thought process as to the initial achievement gap that we've had historically and what costs are taking place in different communities and specifically in Danbury to continue the education in Danbury. So these numbers that I'm showing that you're going to be looking at, I think are going to be astronomical at some point for the city government to handle strictly by itself. If it doesn't come to fruition, then the education in Danbury is going to take a backseat to a lot of our thinking. To me, as I said, this is a turning point on everything we do or you do going forward. You're going to have to start thinking out of the box and not traditional as to what we've done before. As a case in point, I think for the academy and certain expenditures, you should be looking for outside funding and any kind of relationships that you can get in the private sector that would mitigate our costs and certainly help make that academy successful. But again, that's something for a couple of years down the road. Right now, we're faced with at least the immediate problems and those problems that are only projected with certain assumptions going forward. So some of this may be complicated. It was the best format that I think we can come up with. And I'll turn it over to Courtney.
Thanks, Rich. Dr. Sal just joined us. Dr. Sal, did you want to say?
No, I'm sorry, I had computer problem. No, I think just so the board's information, we've received the federal funds. We have the guidelines, particularly over this ESA 2. 3, we're still waiting for. Courtney's done a great job trying to coalesce all of the needs, looking at the original submission to the city. And as the will of the board has indicated, if there's opportunities to mitigate some of the expenses and to modify what we've requested, we should deeply consider that and look at it. And we did, she did, the team did, and we have here some recommendations that we think are viable. With that, I'll just let you go, Courtney. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Sal, for one moment. Okay, I think I'm having a little bit of a connection issue. If you just bear with me for one moment. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay,
I
thanks
can.
much. Okay, so we sent out some schedules today. Can you see the presentation, the slideshow?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was start with sort of level set so that we all kind of have a common set of understanding. And I'm going to do that from the PowerPoint, and then I'm going to move into the detailed schedules. And you can feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me if you'd like during the presentation of the schedules, because it's a bit complex, but I want everyone to be able to see it and ask questions as we go, if that's okay with you, Gladys. So basically, I just first wanted to remind everybody, this was our original budget request. This is what we call the carry forward portion, about 7.2 million. And we had an additional ask of about 6.2 million for various things, including the graduation and kindergarten requirements of teachers, the social emotional support, all the things that we've been talking about all along, we're still asking for. We've only made a slight modification, which I'm going to point out when we go through, which is a phased approach to a portion of the social emotional ask. And everything else gets shifted out to the additional ESSER funding, which I'm going to talk through in detail because I want the board to have an understanding of that, as well as the risks and impacts, and something that Rich has really driven us to do, which is to show you um, a multi-year look at the budget with these sources and what happens when we get to 25-26. So this is just one more reminder, and it's in your packet of the original request. It was 9.82%, the 7 million again, the carry forward, and the $6 million of what we call new programmatic needs, which are really restorations and mandates for the 149 million. So what's new? Well, we found out about additional coronavirus relief funds. Some of it we knew about already, this column, and some of it was new to us. And I talked to Gladys, and she said it was helpful for us to say ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, because it kind of helps us to be clear about that there's 3 different buckets of money, as well as the coronavirus relief funds, which was time limited. This is showing you a schedule of how we could spend those funds over the course of time. So they each have an end date where you have to spend them down. And the idea is this year, when we talk about ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, ESSER 2 was a Coronavirus Response and Relief Act. ESSER 3 is the American Rescue Plan. These are the authorities that grant or granted the right to allocate these funds. This last column is a projected amount because we haven't received it yet. The ESSER 2 is our allocation amount that we are given, but we do have to apply for it. And when we apply for it, it's along the lines of it's allocated along our Title I allocation. So we will get these monies, but we do have to apply for them, and we do have to draw them down and submit backup information about how we're spending them, much like we do with Alliance. So if we were to spread this out evenly with a little tail on the end of the ESSER 2, it's 11.2 million. And this would be the result. If you look at FY 2022, we talk about this big bunch of money, but really it's about 13 million dedicated to 22, 13 million to 23. Then it goes down to 9, and then a million. And then if I added a column here, 2026, it would go away because all of these funds have to be spent, even the ESSER 3, by September 2026, which is our FY 2025. So total funds that we have for all coronavirus relief is about 41.2 million, of which we've already spent some. So the rest that's left is about $36.5 million for us to allocate for the next few years. And why this is important is because if when we get forward to talk about the braiding conversation or using some of these funds to offset what the city we were asking for from the city, which was a $13 million ask, it's now down to 8 million. That's because we're using about 11 million of or 12 million of this 36 million to fund operational costs. So when we went ahead, and we're still in the process of planning this out, because this isn't even, the application isn't even out yet, but we're in the process of planning it out. We said, okay, we can prioritize, and I'll show you in detail some of the things that were in our original ask to be paid for within some of this money, about a third of it. And what this looks like over time, just for a visual to see, if we spend it at that rate, which is allowable, you can see we're kind of having even spending on the coronavirus relief monies over these 2 years, but it drops off and it goes away after fiscal 2025. And why that's going to become important to us, I'm going to build up to this schedule, but I just wanted to show you, and we're going to talk through a series of assumptions and the schedules that are behind this. But if the city only funded us at the current rate, so historically they've funded us over the last 10 years about 1.72% every year, even though we've asked for 3.5, 4, whatever we've asked for, on average, they've given us 1.72%. If they kept doing that every year up until fiscal 2026, when these ESSER monies go away, we would have a $31 million hole. That's a problem. So what we're proposing is, if they were to give us this $9 million this year, it would be a more reasonable increase. And I'm going to talk through these assumptions over the next few years and still leave us with quite a gap in fiscal 2026. So I'm just going to go into the schedules that I sent by stopping share and then resharing the screen. I think this is the one. I'm sorry, guys. I just bear with me for 1 minute. The wrong document. Okay. Can you see a spreadsheet now?
Little large, it'd be helpful a little larger.
Larger, sure thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, I'm not going to go through this one in detail, but I wanted to show you what we used as a working document and just kind of talk through the logic before we get into the summary spreadsheets. So basically we said, here's our updated ask. If we had 136,236, we wanted to restore the old enrollment growth that the city didn't give to us and add a carry forward. So you'll recognize that as that 7170, keep the lights on number. And then we went through and went line by line, and we said, okay, K through 12. Yeah.
Thank you, Honor.
Pardon?
You still have the summary of the multi-year budget.
Oh, thank you, Rich.
Didn't move.
Courtney, can you also make it larger when you come back?
Sure. Okay. Now, do you see a spreadsheet now? And it's
Yeah.
it's blown up a bit. It's pretty big.
Yeah, that's the correct one.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to do that one more time. So I'm going to say, this is our updated ask. So the base was 136,236, which you recognize as our budget number. And then an enrollment growth number, we're saying put that back in and add the carry forward. So that's 7170. Down below, then we took each of the new asks. So the increased enrollment piece, for example, we said, okay, this ask is $945,000. I have to pay for that all through the city budget. And then we went on to the next one. Okay, so you would see special education. I have to pay for that through the city budget. But what we did is we looked at the social emotional intervention and support, which you'll recall was an ask of about $899,000. And we said, okay, we could use, for example, ESSER 3. So we shifted that cost from the city ask into the ESSER 3 column, and so on and so forth. So special ed, we had an SLP. Well, that would have to still continue to be a city ask because, operationally it's something that we need and it doesn't fit the other criteria. But the nurses, for example, could be paid for from ESSER 3, and so on and so forth. And so the curricular programming was shifted into ESSER 3. So what that means from a our summary documents that we showed you last year, that's how we planned out this document to show you from a multi-year perspective what would be needed. We're looking at resources, and then we're looking at the proposed budget for next year. So I'll just give you a sample. So in fiscal year 2022, this is assuming that we have the 136,236 available as part of the base budget. And then we go through line by line and say, okay, there's salaries, there's part-time benefits, everything that we currently have, we've got a plan for, so 136,236. And then in addition, increased K through 12 enrollment. Our original ask was $945,000. We're keeping that at $945,000, and we're paying for it with city money, asking the city to give us funds to pay for that. So this is for special, then I have whether, describing it in the column I. So it's 4 special ed teachers, 3.5 high school teachers, and 6 elementary teachers. Then we move to the social emotional piece. And this is the only one you'll see we've actually modified our ask. So our original ask was 1.2 million, and we've decreased that ask to about 899,000. That's a decrease of 321,000. And the reason we did that is we said, okay, given all of the resources and given the conversations we've had with the board, what we'll propose to do here is rather than hiring 2 APs, we'll phase it in. We'll hire 2 this year and the following the next year. Rather than hiring the 14 proposed student behavioral specialists, we'll phase that in. We'll hire 7 and then 7 the following year. So you'll see that that line represents a reduction in this year, but when you get to fiscal 2023, it's fully there plus a 2.5%. And so on and so forth. So pupil services, as I showed you in our planning document, there's a portion that we're paying for out of the city budget and a portion out of ESSER 2. Curricular programming and support, the same thing. We're shifting that from city into these 2 funding sources. ESLL, again, all the teachers are here and the SIOP would be here. I'm going to show you when we get to fiscal 2026, we move that back to city, which is why you're going to see a big need in fiscal 2020, 25, 26. And we'll get there. But this is just showing the current year. And then learning loss mitigation summer school. So this is just the portion of summer school that was associated with the new request. It's not the additional summer school funding that we're looking for. We are accounting for that elsewhere because this is just the increased children that are coming to us this year as a result of the mandated requirements of increasing summer school options for students that were happening in spite of the virus. We also need to increase through the ESSER coronavirus relief funds on top of that to mitigate learning loss associated with the virus. This is just the ask associated with our original request in the city budget. And then you'll remember technology and operations was made up of busing, a lease, and some technology requirements. And this is the same, but we've been able to shift some of the funding out to the other funding sources. The maintenance budget, again, you'll recognize this number of the enrollment add and the general maintenance, which adds up to that 7170. And we're funding that all through the city because we don't want to supplant our operations. Anything that we've shifted is our new things, and we're going to account for that in the out years as well. So you'll recognize this original total request of 13.3 million against a current budget of 135,686. Now that does include the matrix funding, and that was a 9.78% change in our original request. Now that we've modified this budget, it's going down to a $9 million request on the city side. This is the city column, or a 6.71% increase because we've shifted all of these pieces into CARES 1, 2, and 3 for a total of about $3.8 million in this year. And I'm just adding it up on the bottom and showing you the total here. So our original request was 149,560,000. Our new request is 149,239,000 for a reduction of 321,000 for the reasons that I mentioned before about delaying some of the social emotional interventions. And that's made up of a total ask of $9 million from the city, and then being supported with the federal funding of $3.8 million. Now, if we go out to 23, 24, 25, and 26, it's essentially the same thing that I'm showing you, but what happens is in 2026, all of these funding don't exist for us anymore. So I'm saying if we're assuming that we're still going to need to do all of these things that we proposed in this year's budget, and let's say that they grow by a very conservative amount, which is only 2.5% per year. And let's say that the curriculum request, which had a lot of one-time things in it, is now going to drop in the out years. But it still has a need that's above our base request. Because right now we fund the curriculum at the end of the year, with what's left over from underspending. And really this needs to be built into our base budget. And so this is the amount, if you talk about the staffing that we committed, as well as some tactile investments in curriculum materials, as well as software, this is what we would need to continue to sustain. So what does that mean? So against the request, which is escalating by taking the original request and escalating it by just 2.5% per year and making a few adjustments, which I'm going to go over, that would result in an overall need of $176 million by the time we get to 2026. All of these numbers are referenced on this summary document. So I'm just going to go over these assumptions and then just let you know these link to all of these documents with the pieces that we just spoke about. So what that means is right now we recognize the city budget of next year of a base of 136,236. If the city did nothing, that's what we would have as a budget. And if they gave us just 1.72% each year, that would mean, which is what they've given us historically over the last 10 years on average, we would only get to 145 million by fiscal 2026. But our need, as you can see, and this ties to these spreadsheets here for 23, 24, 25, is going to grow to 176 million by fiscal 2026. And that's only assuming a few things. So it's a very conservative estimate. It's assuming that we take the $13 million investment that we needed, 9 of it's funded with city money, the other 6 million or so is funded with, 13 million, 4 million is funded with ESSER funds over the years, but that ESSER money goes away. We assume that we just need that, and I'm only adding 2 ESL teachers per year after that, and only 2 counselors per year after that, because we talked about a multi-year approach for those. And I'm adding also a 2% enrollment growth assumption, which is if you fund that at $12,000 a kid with the 2% enrollment growth, those are the assumptions built in. It barely gets us to where we needed to be today, because our 13 million ask was not enough yet. And it accounts for a really modest assumption about enrollment growth. So what are the 2 scenarios? If the city only funded us at 1.72%, next year that need would grow to 13 million, then it would grow to 17 million, then it would grow to 24, and then it would grow to 31 million by the time we got to 2026. If the city funded our need this year, the incremental need next year would be about 4 million, because we have those other resources, another 4 million. And you notice the resources start to go away in fiscal 2025, because we talked about that on our other chart. So the need goes up in 2025. And then in 2026, it starts to plateau a little bit. But it's also, we have a loss in funding here. So what does that mean? So Dr. Sal asked me to show you the percentages. So if we get 0% this year, we're looking at 9.4, 12.2, 17.0, 21.3. These would be the needs against a 1.72% increase. So we would still need this much more every year. If they gave us the 9 million this year, the increment would be still a high increment, but relatively modest. We also wanted to show you the estimated alliance, because you know that alliance has been traditionally used to offset some of our operational costs. And so this is just the Alliance increment, because we're assuming that that other $14 million that we have currently planned is still needed for the extension of the K, for the ESL teachers that it's funding, for all of the curriculum and data assessments and things that Alliance are currently being utilized for. So typically, we've used some of these funds to offset, our operational needs, because Alliance ECS money was frozen, and the state money is frozen, and the only real increase that we get is through that Alliance increase. So if they freeze it these 2 years, and they only give us the extra 2 for 6.5 by 2026, you can see how it doesn't really keep pace with the needs either. So we're challenged on the city side, and we're challenged on the state side. And the point, I suppose, that we're trying to make with this presentation is, even with some conservative assumptions about growth, we need a steady commitment over time from the city, and we need ramped up advocacy to escalate this ECS funding, at the very least to pop up the 6, which we should have gotten in FY 2024, because even though we're not supposed to, we could utilize that to offset some of the projected growth that we have assumed in the budget. And I'll pause there and see, because that's a lot of information so far, if there are any questions.
I have a quick question, if I could.
Sure.
Courtney, when you talk about the 12,000 per pupil cost, is that city side funding at 12,000, or is that total expenses on a student in the district?
Yeah, that's total, and it's just the average. It's not even what would be needed, and it's not assuming anything about ESLL, because the state does have an assumption about what you need for ESLL and what you need for SPED and what you need for children living in lower income family situations. So this is just a gross assumption, that just to give us a placeholder to say, if we had 2% growth per year at a $12,000 cost per pupil, which is still really a low estimate, this would be what we'd be looking at.
Okay. Can I ask one follow-up question?
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, and forgive me because I just don't have financial background here, but I'm trying to understand the benefit, presenting this with a conservative estimate when we know it's likely to be higher than that.
Well, we did get the demographer analysis today, so we can update that 2%. And I use that as a benchmark cost because that's roughly what we spend now. Without having we can, and I could put an assumption about how much it really does cost us to educate a student in Danbury, which we probably should do. I mean, it's a good feedback, because the state does have those estimates for us based on our ECS formula. So if you don't mind, I could update that and send it back out as part of the presentation. That would be that's good feedback.
Thanks, Courtney.
Sure.
And Courtney, could you go back on the revenue side and explain the concept for the ESSER funding, the second line across?
This one here. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important. So what this is saying, I'm showing the total here. This is about $12 million. So as we did our planning, you'll remember here I showed this summary, which says we actually have 36.6 million in total funding from 22 to 25, basically over the next few years. But of that, this is the portion, 12 million, that we're proposing to use to offset essentially our operational requests from last year in a baseline way, in an ongoing way. So it's about a third of the funding that if we had to do this, if we're getting what we do to propose to reduce the ask to the city, it would mean that roughly a third of that money would be repurposed to utilize for these new asks that we had as part of this budget.
So would I be correct in saying, so my way of thinking is sort of, we dipped into the one-time funding to use it going forward, and have created that $12 million, as you talk about here, would be so-called a cliff that we are resulting in terms of utilizing the ESSER money to apply it against our operating budget. Would that be
That's
correct?
exactly, that's correct, Rich. And the point is, if the city doesn't maintain, we can do that, and we're proposing to do that. But if the city doesn't maintain a steady commitment over the next few years, we have to acknowledge that we would be left with a really significant hole in 2026, which doesn't even account for an academy cost of maybe even $6 to $9 million.
Right. Then just to, if you have that schedule, I wanted to show one of the schedules you had was the schedule of the alliance funding and the proration of it over the course of time. It was getting, we're showing the years that the monies were coming in, and ultimately the total amount of funding that would have made it whole, I think, was in the $50 million.
Yeah. So this one, Rich, I think you're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it bigger.
Oh, wait,
Trying to make it bigger. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I just want to call, to everybody's attention that we're moving ahead, and to your point, Kate, on a conservative basis. We know that these are just estimates. However, just look, if we were fully funded, how that money would impact us and have a favorable impact, and then readjusting these numbers so that it would also mitigate the burden that the city has to compensate us for education. And that's why in my earlier comment, I said that we've got to think outside the box and now put our efforts as a city in its entirety to see what we can do to capture money that's due us, not that they're paying us 10 years forward for money that was due us 10 years ago or something. But it demonstrates the magnitude of the numbers and how much we're suffering because of the lack of funding that we've been getting. Okay, and so when you look at the funding rate of close to 2% a year, as well as the deficit that the state has put us in, that affects that affects these numbers, and it also, going ahead, is going to affect the quality of education for us in terms of what we're looking to do in Danbury. And that's why I think it's very important to understand the impact of these numbers and how we go about collectively trying to work a solution to this particular problem. We certainly don't want to just walk away I don't mean walk away, but historically, when things were pre-COVID, the Board of Ed made a budget. It went to the city gave us an appropriation, and then the Board of Ed did its magic by coming up with doing something, to meet that appropriation, and basically kept the philosophy of keeping teachers in the classroom. I tend to think that philosophy and that methodology is gone now. These numbers are too big, and we don't have wiggle room anymore.
yeah, and I think to Rich's point, if you look at this $9 million ask, which is 13 million, because we're still funding all the things we want to do, and they don't go away, they're here still in 2026, right? That wasn't even catching up for what we needed in 2022. So that alone, $9 million ask, but it's all the $13 million of things that we asked for are funded out up to 2.5%. And the only thing that's added here is 2 counselors a year and 2 ESL teachers a year. So even then, we're showing a big gap. So I think these aren't the numbers to hang your hat on and say, you told me we were going to need 30 million in 2026. These numbers are illustrative of where we are because we were so short as it was in 2022. And this includes an enrollment growth of 2%, which again, like you said, it's a conservative enrollment growth. But just to illustrate the point that with even only a 2% enrollment growth and only holding steady at the things that we asked for today, with just a few modest increases in ESLs, And then again, the enrollment growth assumes a cost per pupil. So that's busing and that's teachers and that's support staff and that's all the things that go with it. But still, you know, it leaves us with a big gap. And again, it's the city commitment and the state commitment, both, that we need to all come to the terms with the fact that we're at a turning point, as Rich said. We're at a turning point where we can't ignore this looming problem any longer. And with people saying that we have the ESSER monies, yes, we do. But even with us very prudently taking a third of it to support operations, we still have a looming problem. And we're at a turning point that we all have to come to reconcile, that if we want to serve our kids appropriately and correctly for the next few years and into the future, and when we build our academy and when we do all the things we want to do, we're going to have to start really acknowledging this reckoning day, you know, I think.
And again, it's important to note the comment on the schedule here underneath relative to the academy, that it does not include an estimated cost for the academy. So again, these numbers just become higher no matter which assumption you look at. But if again, in the near future, we're looking to build a $90 million structure or have an investment of $90 million, we certainly don't want to go back to what happened in the building the extension on the high school, where we have a brick and mortar building and we have no funds to staff it, and we have to do that over a period of time. So we didn't want to throw in that number there because that would really be a high ballpark number, but I think it's an important consideration to have as to how the numbers would increase and really what's at stake for us going forward.
And so I think what Rich was asking us to show here was not just that we are being cooperative and acknowledging that the ESSER money is out there and some of it could be utilized for some of the things that we were doing in this budget. And however, even with using those funds, it doesn't achieve the things that we need for our future without a steady commitment from the city and state. And even then we're challenged, you know, because we were challenged to start with. So that's kind of the takeaways that we were hoping, you know, Dr. Sal and Cabinet, when we put this together and with Rich's help, that you could see, you know, this delicate balancing act that's going to be challenging for the next few years.
Can I say something or ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't disagree that we're at a turning point for sure. This has been very helpful. So thank you both, Rich and Courtney. Just to be clear, the Alliance increment is both Alliance and ECS. Correct? So that, I mean, it's supposed to help fund operations as well. So I don't understand why it's taken out, you know, why it's on the bottom.
Sure.
And not within the formula. And then so the total need should be a total city and state need.
Yep. Yep.
I feel like we're kind of letting the state off the hook here.
Yeah. So let's say it this way. I hear you and I agree with you. ECS has like a $30-something million base that the state has stayed flat. The increment is given to us through Alliance, which is an adjusted formula every year, you know, based on our enrollment mix. And we all know that. This is just saying if all things go forward the same, you know, without us, we've found efficiencies. We've dove down into the budget and found some fuel efficiencies, some paper efficiencies. We might be able to even find some energy saving efficiencies in the future, etc. We've repurposed everything we could repurpose. So within the formula for ECS, which let me just stop share and show here because I think you already know this, but just so we all have the same terminology. Okay, I'm putting back up this slide, which this is the total funding. It's not coming up. Do it one more time. Okay, this is the total funding. So when we started in 2019, this 32 million was what we had when they established that legislation back in, I think it was 2017, right? And they said, you have 32 million, but you really should today have 56 million. So every year from now till then, we're going to adjust those numbers, but we're roughly going to give you about 2.7 million every year. So you're correct to say that so what we've gotten from then has been about $14 million, right? That 14 million, I'm not showing here because, let me go back to this document. We can, and we did in the past, we're saying everything we were doing with that 14 million, we still need to do. All the kindergarten teachers, all the ESLLs. The only thing that's going to change if the state's legislation goes forward as it is, we're going to freeze, not get any more money for the next 2 years. And this is just the incremental increase. So we're saying we're doing everything the same in the base for that 14 million. The other part of the 14, which is the third, makes up to the 20 million, is part of how the city allocates our money in our share. So we're doing all this. This is just showing the increment. You're right. We can put it together and show one big picture, which we should. And the reason I included this as a below the line is because technically this is supposed to be above and beyond to close the achievement gap, because we have to apply for it every year. As you know, we have to submit really substantial documentation that Kara Wanzer and Dr. Casimiro work on to substantiate closing the achievement gap. And even though it was yesterday's dollars, it's still meant to be augmentative. So we could technically use it to offset this because all of our other state money is frozen outside of this alliance increment. So we're not trying to.
I think the people on the board know that the standard had been at least 51% of it had to be new. Yeah. All of it, even if it's operational, which is part of the thinking, it has to go to mitigating the achievement gap.
Yeah.
So when we put together the application and they do the review, that's what they look at, those statistics.
Yeah.
The governor,
governor
did it too for when he coalesced the money with ECS, saying here town, it used to come out actually separate, and then it was aggregated, and it's been apart just so that we know that if we got 2.1, that's new money we have to put towards the over and above the operational funds if we can. So that's why it's been kind of like mixed in together.
And
it's separate.
And this isn't to say, so I just wanted to add to what Dr. Sal said too. It's like for example, the kindergarten teachers, that was extending the kindergarten day, right? So it was adding more hours to the kindergarten teachers and more service, even though it's funding like an operational need. The ESLL, teachers falling into that allowed us to expand the ESLL teachers. So technically it is supposed to be not supplanting what we're already doing in the budget. But it's true that we could, some of this, could be folded back in if the state put this back to 6159 right here. Some of the things that we're doing that we're folding into ESSER, we could do in Alliance potentially. Now, does that leave us short again? Yeah, it does. But that's kind of why we showed this below the line, because really this money should be available to us for what it's intended to be for, which is closing the achievement gap outside of all of these basic needs that we have, which total up to 176 million by 2026.
And Rachel, to your point, the state is getting off the hook, because if we go back to the schedule that Courtney showed on the funding from the state, and if you look at the total, it's $56 million that's really due us, and they're going to get to that number in 2028. Just imagine if we hadn't advocated that we get that $56 million that's due us. I mean, the differential between that and the point at which we're at is some $37 million, would certainly help our cause overall, regardless of how we allocated it, whether it be to alliance projects or funding. It still goes to take a bite out of our distressed numbers that we're asking for. So we're just being shortchanged all over. And over the course of time, it's really come back to bite us at this particular point in time. I mean, we can no longer continue to do what we've been getting. And that's why it's so important that whatever they're doing in the state legislature for this ECS, the ECS formula, we stay on top of it and we do everything possible, both in city and Board of Ed, to make sure that we make our point clear that we get the funding. And we just demonstrate to the city of Danbury the situation that we're in. We've never had something that went ahead a number of years. And I think it's an eye opener. I'm not saying we have the answers. We certainly don't have the answers to this, but I think collectively we put all our cards on the table and act as one unit and not us against them or them against us, but there's a problem here to resolve. We have to look how to face it and get this issue, because if we don't, we can ill afford to cut back, anything in these programs that we're looking to put ahead. And also, as a side point, I find it, and I was just talking to Courtney today, we sort of agreed on this. I find it hard to believe that the federal government at this particular point would jumpstart education, jumpstart the economy, and let it go there. Somebody in that government has to be smart enough to realize that education hasn't been the funding to education vis-a-vis the Title I money hasn't been increased in anything of any substantial quantities to represent the particular times. So the need is going to be, my feeling is the need's going to be in the future for the government to come in with something similar to this ERISA money that provides funding for education. It's got to be another funding source for us, because these numbers are just too large for a municipality to be able to handle. At least I think anyway, but that's more editorializing.
That, Richard,
It just shows that, yeah.
do we have any idea how the mill rate will be affected by this ask?
I don't know what I don't know what tomorrow's night's meeting, I think on the city council's budget tomorrow night agenda is the budget, and I think they're going to give that number. I would tend to think that if I were the mayor coming in, or if I were the existing mayor, that the safe place to be would try for an increase of a nominal amount, knowing the economy stinks. I can't raise taxes, on residents and on businesses. So I'm going to have to suck wind this particular year. We're going to have to tie in our belts. I mean, that's what I think. Do I know anything more than that? No, it's only an assumption on my part. How will that?
I was just wondering how this money would affect the mill rate if we happen to, by some miracle, get it all. I just wondered. Do you know?
Yeah. I remember I did this for Al. I don't want to misspeak on, but I can get that to you, Kathy, because Al and I did that when it was the original ask of 13 million.
Yeah.
And we translated that into mill rates and the percentage tax increase for an average home in Danbury. I can send that to you after this. I just don't want to misspeak, and I don't remember off the top of my head.
Well,
Kathy,
I just saw
yeah.
that will be part of their argument, obviously.
Yeah.
It was a sizable increase, Kathy.
Yeah.
I mean, which is why we did come down in the number, and even coming down, it's an increase. And the challenge is obviously, compared to a Greenwich, when you're talking about one mill rate in Danbury, it doesn't equal a mill rate in Greenwich. So the fact is the state really needs to honor its commitment to catch up to our needs,
Right.
But we want everyone to see the full picture of information. And to Rachel's point earlier, we want to be as transparent as can be. So we'd like to share with you how we planned for the Alliance $14 million existing spending. We're just showing the increment because it hasn't been planned for yet. But it just was so much info. And, we included that last year, but now you add all of these ESSER sources and it becomes kind of big. The goal is not to let the state off the hook, really, truly, this is the picture for the state. They have not kept pace when Danbury went like this and everywhere else in Connecticut went like that in terms of population, they couldn't just grab back all that money and give it out. So to Rich's point, maybe there will be some reconciling with the federal commitment when districts are changing like that, and how that impacts. You know, it's positive that Danbury is growing. It's challenged for our local population. We're probably one of the more challenged in the country for all of these reasons. We're in a state of declining, a state of Connecticut which is declining, but we're in a region that's growing, and it's growing in ways that's more expensive to educate, and there's not a federal commitment. So all of these forces are converging for us, and we just all want people to be aware of the facts so we can put our advocacy in the right places.
And Kathy, the average, it's a meeting, I'm on a planning commission and for Denver, and we were getting some information that the average value of the house in Denver is $399,000. The average value in Fairfield County is what I think 900,000, 899,000 or 900,000. So, I mean, it's, if Courtney wants to do a calculation, she could do it on the 399. And then of course there was the average income they had for Danbury, and you compare it to Fairfield, it was blown out of the water. So it wasn't even, a number that was even to be mentioned. But I think these are things that we have to instill on the city government and going ahead and working together. There's a tremendous amount of information, but it's going, and the more information like this that I think we get out to the general public, I think it would certainly educate them to understand the plight that we have. I'm not asking anybody to storm the gates or anything like that, but and I hate to use the word transparency, but I think if we just educate people as to what we see today and going forward to the best that we could at least forecast with other things in the hopper, we've got a particular problem that we have to solve. And I say we being, and I can't stress it enough, the city of Danbury. This is not a Board of Ed problem. We can't solve this problem. The only thing we can do is come up and put the numbers together, and then we go with our hat, it's like going to church on Sunday and they pass the hat or the basket, and that's basically our position in the past. So, we've got to take more of an advocacy position.
So just from just a comment here. Every year we've been having our conversation, and I don't think this is news to anyone that we've had a shortfall. So yeah, we could speak to all of this, and it will be the way it is. What people have to keep in mind now is that the money you have, our primary job, your job, board, Sal's job, is to get those kids in school 5 days a week. That's going to be unbelievably expensive. What happens here, as this budget goes down, and you don't see it in the narrative, there's only one thing you have to cut the budget. You either cut people, and we have stayed away from. So you all know that we have a very lean, I think, administrative staff, and that's fine. But your class numbers are growing exponentially. So when they look at us and they say, Danbury, why is it you can't bring these kids in? You're starting from a standard of 24, 26, 27. You're not starting from 21 or 19 to get kids down. So all of this, as we cut down, and we still have to rent the space, we still have to educate our ELL kids, our SPED kids, our gifted kids, have the AP courses. We've never cut athletics, but you can look at it for $1 million. Doesn't pay because it really impacts kids. The only thing we have is to curtail the offerings at the high school, and we've done some of that when they're very low enrollment. But by and large, your classes are going up higher, higher, and higher in terms of FTEs. And that's what's creating the issues, and the only way we've been able to mitigate the money here. And then what you have to make Danbury at least pushing forward has been the Alliance money and anything we've been able to get from Title I and money that we've gotten from other grants, whatever foundation. So now with the 36 million, I think the thinking is, well, geez, you know, that much money, they ought to be able to flow through. And I'm saying to you, you know, really, that doesn't work. It really doesn't. And we'll cut back. And as Richard says, it is a town problem, but it's a board problem when it gets cut, when you increase the numbers and you have to provide the education. What Courtney didn't do in here, I mean, we could put, as Kate's point, just about 12,999 for average student. But you know, your ELL population's growing, your SPET population's growing because of class sizes, migration in. You're talking youngsters there is $19,000 to $20,000 a student. We're the what, fourth highest in ELL in the state. We have 2,700 kids. We have a growing population, about 13% to 14% special ed. You put that on your 12,000 students multiplied by 14%, those youngsters we have to, those are in special ed. So all of this comes down on the kids' shoulders. And I'm sorry, when I talk to folks in city government, they do exactly what Rich said. You know, the economy is terrible. We can't bring it to them. I get that. But understand that, you know, this money has to go to at least trying to open up the school. And we can't just shift it all over to fiscal 21 or 22 to make this thing work, because the cliff just gets exacerbated. And that's my worry. And that's my advice to you is, you know, I've looked at it every year, and that's where it's coming down in the class with the teachers, with high numbers of students, generally speaking, throughout most of the core areas in the schools. So that's my worry. And I think, I'm sorry, I just think that we've done a pretty good job of trying to find what would apply and saying, here, this is a true, an honest look at it. And then Courtney put the percentages on there that if they increase the percentage reasonably, you know, maybe there's a way around here. But if you start getting 1.2 and, you know, 1.3 and 1.5, we're in massive trouble here.
Yeah, you're still gonna have a huge gap. Yeah. Yeah. And the idea too is so we did take a third of that and set aside for just this year's operational and then baselining it up, like the cost of the counselors and the some of the ESLL, you know, the SIAP coach, for example, and things like that, and the curriculum needs. But there's still about 20 some odd $million left in the ESSER that we've been planning for. And we're already over allocated in terms of what we need to do with that money. As Dr. Sal said, if we need to spread out kids, if we need to buy additional buses, we're looking at, you know, which brings up, Dr. Sal, can I ask the board that about the bus?
Yeah, I was going to mention that to you. We have the opportunity, aside from here, as we did a few years ago, the bus company has 1 year left on their contract, and we have been asking for more buses, and they have a proposal they'll give us and give it to the board to consider, which would possibly reduce some of the transportation costs, but they're looking for an extension of the contract as they've done in the past. So I think Courtney will be able to bring something to the finance group to see if it's something you're interested in doing to control some of the cost. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's allowable. And their proposal will be, we don't have the numbers, but it will be, you know, some freezing of the percent increase and then some lowering. So right now our bus contract, for example, has a standard 3.5% increase every year. And if we were to ask them to add, say, for example, anywhere between 5 to 10 buses next year, because we're looking at, you know, even this year with us in hybrid, we've had some challenges with the busing because, you know, we're able to distance out the kids because we've got a certain percentage that are on remote learning. And then we've got half in on a given day because we're still in the 3-2-2-3. But when we bring the kids in full, that 3 per seat per day until all kids are vaccinated, that's not going to work. We're going to need additional buses. And it's exacerbated by the problem that, you know, we're seeing across the teaching population and our staff in general, and in your own community, in your own life, as people are sick, you know, they can't work and they have to be quarantined if they're exposed to a sick person. So when we have less drivers, occasionally, if we don't find out until late, we've got to double up a bus, and that won't work with our current number of buses. So Dr. Sal asked me to look at least to expand 5 to 10 buses. And you know, we add about 2 to 3 buses per year to account for our increased population. So we're anticipating that probably won't be just a next year issue, but it will be a multi-year issue where we're going to need the additional buses. So we went to STA and we said, can you give us a proposal to add those buses? And what would that look like? And they're working through that for us. But as Dr. Sal mentioned, what they're asking for is an extension to the existing contract. We have one more year left on the contract. It was a 5-year contract. We've done an extension in the past. This was 15 years ago. We had a 5-year contract and we did a 5-year extension. The one we're in now was a new RFP 4 years ago. So what it would do is we would extend the existing contract to be able to buy the additional buses this year. And when we have the details of the proposal, I'll bring it back to the Finance Committee. But we wanted to make you aware. And it will be challenging. You know, as we talk to colleagues, it's hard to find buses. It's hard to find drivers because everybody's facing the same situation. You know, we're not the only ones. We happen to be pretty crowded, but we're not the only ones that need to spread out kids, you know, more in the upcoming year.
And again, Courtney and Dr. Stell, none of anything we talked about so far has been projected to what the cost would be to open up the school next year, you know, with all inclusive, including, let's say, buying or getting an additional 10 buses and the possibility of renting a facility to handle the overflow. So
Yeah.
if I just pick the number, you're probably looking at the buses alone is another $1 million, which at some point in time, I would assume would have to be absorbed in our budget. You know, I don't know if we can let all 10 go, but that's down the road. And then the thing that would go away would be the rental cost for a facility. Hopefully that certainly would go away. So there are a lot of moving parts to what's going on. And every time you look at something, you know, you're talking, you know, $1 million here, $1 million there. These numbers are big numbers.
Point is the money that's in front of you here. The board's going to have to allocate it to opening, and we're looking at a multitude of options, including the things that you're talking about. We need more space. That's costly. There's busing that's in here, and now we're working with the architect to go through and vet these places out. This is all moving, you know, 24/7, you know, day by day that we're doing it. But my only point is, you know, it may be, I think Courtney said $20 million in there. You know, right now some spaces can go, you know, you need 76,000 square feet, you know, $20 to $30 a square foot is reasonable. If you can't find reasonable, you know, you're talking quite a bit of money there.
Yeah.
Aside from that, what the board needs is that we're talking staffing. Today we toyed with an idea of the 24 possibly, you know, now, you know, if we do that, you know, we always have an attrition the following year, but, you know, the initial expenditure is high to do that. So, you know, I'm going to do what we can to open this up. If the town doesn't give us the money, you know, I'm saying to you is we got to open up somehow, and they have to find the money. You don't want to sit here in the fall waiting for the government to say, don't worry about the 3-foot mitigation anymore. Bring them all back in, because if you do that and they don't do it, you know, it's really unfair to our kids, and it'll create great chaos.
Yes,
We don't want to be.
What you're not seeing here, just to reiterate one more time what Dr. Saul said and what Rich said, is the other 20 million. So in other words, we're only showing you the ESSER portion that we plan to offset the existing costs for the current needs that we proposed in this budget. And we have to baseline it because they're staff and they don't go away. So we're showing you that here. But Sal's goal and the cabinet's goal is to get the kids back 5 days a week next year. And to Sal's point, that's expensive. And that's going to require an investment, whether it's in buses or space or furniture. Some modifications are going to be needed in addition to the curricular work and the family engagement work that is the intention of those funds to mitigate the learning lost during the pandemic and the social emotional challenges and all of those other pieces. So just bear in mind that's going to be part of another board workshop. It's just we didn't want to throw everything at you. And because this ESSER 3 funding is not yet, you know, ours, we're not showing it to you yet because we're still in the planning process, and we've got to submit that application for ESSER 2 in about a week and a half. So we're getting there. Yeah.
Courtney, can I just ask a question, sort of help me out just a little bit better? We've submitted our budget, the Board of Ed budget, to City Hall, requesting 13 million, okay? And you worked it and brought it down to a number of, I think 7 or 6 million, okay? How do we can't change the budget because it's already at City Hall. So how would this be presented to Common Council and the mayor as to we asked them for 13. We asked the original for 13, and now you know we're saying that we can work with 7 or 8 million. I just explain that to me a little bit more.
I think, let me try that, Courtney. Before we could, this is a board workshop. The board as a whole has to vote and say, look, you know what, because you approved it as a board, tell us to modify the budget. That's one way. The other way is tomorrow night, when we get the budget number, I'm just going to speculate that we're not the way we ask. That's going to make an automatic cut on you anyway. So it's kind of a moot point. You know what I mean? So I think we go one step at a time, see what happens tomorrow night, Wednesday night at the board meeting, we could present that, because I have no idea about how much money the city is going to allocate. So if they give you, for example, $3 million, I'll just use that as an example. Well, we already cut half of it, so now we got to cut the rest because you know where we're at. So it's kind of all we're doing is a good faith effort, saying, look, you know, we have the opportunity here to mitigate it now, going into it, and I think it's just very transparent what we're doing.
Okay.
That's where I'm at on
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Gladys, it lets us have that response to council too. Like if they say, we're only going to give you 2 million because you have 30 something million, we're saying, no, we told you we were going to make that good faith effort when we found out we got the ESSER 2 and 3 money. We've done that, and we still think we need 9. So we could even come back and potentially negotiate or have influence. I don't know if they can do anything. If they say give us 4 million and we say, but it's really 9, and look what will happen if you don't sustain the commitment.
Madam Chair.
That's, you know, yeah.
Thank you both. Yeah, because I think it's very, you know, it really need to be clear, because like we're sitting here, it's not even 20 of us. There's so many people out in the community that don't understand what we're talking about.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes.
Thank you. In response to Courtney's question, or the question about the mill rate, I found the document. The board's proposed increase of 13.3 million would require an increase of an estimated 6% to taxes. And that's based on the mill rate of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Al.
And that was the 13 million. So if it was modified down to the 9 million, I'm assuming it would be 4% or something like that. What's 9 out of 30, right? Like a little bit modified.
Yeah, and I think it was on 300,000. You estimated the value of the house too.
Correct, and you're saying it's now 399. So
Yeah,
I can update that.
200,000 on this estimate.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll update the estimate with the average value and with our current ask, and I'll send it around to the board after this.
The other thing that we don't know, and up in Hartford, if they don't accept the governor's proposal, we don't have the precipitous cut the first year. So that helps mitigate this as well. So that's kind of in the hopper as well. I've been trying to read on that. I haven't gotten much back. The only thing we all got was that the legislators didn't receive it very positively. I don't know what that really means in the end, but that's got to go into this. So the model here gets a little bit wanky if in fact it comes back and he doesn't get all of what he asked for too. So I keep that in the back of your mind as well.
I think the only thing we could set in stone is that our costs are increasing and everything else is a variable, and basically is an unknown. So we got the tail end of the stick here. We should have been in the other side where we were, you know, heavy with the revenue and looking to spend the money. But I think Courtney's done an excellent job trying to put together something that's very complicated and try to present as much information as possible that we go forward with, and see what we have to do to just make our point across is how needy we are to get these this money. You know, we can ill, I keep saying we can ill afford to take a $3 million hit and cut what we have. But let's wait for tomorrow and see what happens. And then we have our dog and pony show with the council to try to convince them. There does seem to be a lot of momentum out there in supporting the school budget. So it's more that this year I've heard more of that than I've heard in the past. I think that's good, whatever that, whatever that means. I don't know, but certainly to have support and people advocate for us is a good thing. But it's
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Courtney. I'll get back to
Oh,
you.
I just wanted to second what Rich said, because I truly appreciate all the work that Kevin and Dr. Sal and the community group with Amy and Rich and Kate and Gladys have done to set up the community outreach, because it's been really invaluable, I think, to be able to educate people about the different pieces of funding that we have and what that means for us for the future. And so thank you for everybody that participated in those meetings. It's been helpful to me. And yeah. I'm sorry, Kate.
If it's okay, I'd like to just make a comment. I have to say I'm still sitting here with some reservation, because what we're talking about is how to keep the schools afloat in their current situation, like maintaining the current level of services that we have with an expectation of those enrollment increases and how to plan for those enrollment increases. And I know that there's the component of, planning for the Career Academy, but I do still have some reservation here, because, we're walking back the ask that we made, based around what this short list of needs are. And I don't feel like we're giving a full picture of what some of the larger needs are in our district. One of the things that's come up a number of times is a conversation about the gifted and talented program that we don't have. This kind of budget planning, unfortunately, and the context we're giving this budget doesn't really take that doesn't take that into account. It doesn't talk about an expansion of, different types of educational programming that maybe in our schools is not as robust because of the constraints of our existing budget situation. And I do think that it would be really helpful if we could have a list of, sort of the existing needs, whether those are building and structural repairs, whether those are, curriculum planning costs, whether those are, areas that we might be interested in expanding to create a more robust educational experience for our kids. If we had that list to begin with, I think the conversation that we could have with the community and with city leadership might look a little different, because it would be easier to say, this is what our goal is. This is what we're looking for. And this is the portion that we're asking for help with. I think it would just help provide some context for what we're asking for, and sort of give perspective on like the bigger picture of what we're trying to do with the schools. So I realize, like, right now, this year has just been one new deadline after another. So I certainly appreciate, Courtney, all the hard work you've put in this, Dr. Sal, Kevin, everybody who's been involved in the planning. And I don't want to diminish that in any way. I just think that this is another piece that we have to think a little bit more about in order to give, city leadership a sense of the big picture of what we're doing.
Well, Kate, thank you for that. And we, in this new budget, there's a lot of support. And I will say to you, in my departing words, that when you develop the portrait of a graduate, in there will give you a set of standards that you will measure the activities that you do in the schools regarding whether it's remediation or extension of curriculum. I think that'll give you an alignment to what we're all about and what the argument is regarding what do we have to offer in order to challenge all the kids. So I would employ you to look at that and then see how we can achieve that in meeting the needs of our students, because in our population, I will say at the high school, you have one of the most comprehensive high schools in the state. You are offering gifted programs at the state, at the high school. We are. I would be challenged at the middle school, at the elementary to offer some special programming. So I think, it's legitimate. Our money has been focusing on getting to the core, remediating, and pacing. So, we do some extensions, and that's a lot of it based on teacher interest and things of that nature. So I think the timing is good. We could talk with that, but looking at the portrait of the graduate would give you a set of standards of how we can move things for kids to challenge them. So that's what I would say we should do. And I think you got an excellent person in Dr. Kesmera. She'll take 3 hours of you 1 minute and tell you how we can get there. Yeah, so I think we can do that once you have that portrait of the graduate. So, but thank you for that.
Thanks, Dr. Sal.
Yeah.
She has done that to a degree with what we had gotten. I mean, we've seen it, with the ESSER one or the CARES money and the Alliance carryover this year, and what she's been able to leverage in that short period of time. She will build on, we will build on, continue to push for. And you're right, in a budget presentation, it should reflect your values. It should have all of those things. And, we need to get there. We absolutely need to get there.
So Courtney, before we go, I think people in the public might have a question about the Revitalize America, whatever they want to call ESSER 3. We don't have anything in writing. I mean, I should say, we have some things in writing, but nothing concrete, right? So we have to get that before we could start saying this, what we're doing with it. So people out there, I'm wondering and saying, well, is there something they're not telling us? And I'm saying, no, we don't really know. We know we're supposed to get it, right? For sure. We know we have the ESSER 2 money for sure.
Yeah.
But we're getting the other, but we don't have a lot of details to be looking at. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yeah. So, for me from finance, it's not until I have the signed letter or the grant in the system. So ESSER 2 is in the system. We know how much we're getting. We know how much we have to apply for. We know how to apply for it. ESSER 3 was just kind of passed to us from a colleague that said, this is the estimate right now. Now it all makes sense because we see how the federal rule and how it's allocated to the state and what the state assumption is. We can say, yeah, we're pretty much sure we're going to get this much money, and it all, but we have not seen anything official from the state about it. Not yet. So to be determined, and they expect to have it out to us in the next week or so. So we should have more information soon about ESSER 3.
Thank you.
Mr. Janelli?
No, I have no more to say. Just thank everybody for their efforts, Courtney and the administration. I do want to comment one thing. The administration we have is it should be included in these numbers here, is probably the lowest in the state of Connecticut. It's hard to fathom that we continue to work under these conditions with 6 or 7 people in a cabinet. For the most time, it's mind-boggling the amount of work they have to do, and sometimes it's being more reactive than proactive, which is unhealthy. So I think we've got to change that as well.
Well, thanks, Rich. I'm going to go to a PTO meeting at 7:30, and I got about 25 questions. And I just want to lay out to the board, I've known you for a number of years, that, part of the challenge we're having is to try to follow the best practice, in my view, and in the medical view, in terms of distancing. And I think any mitigation of this money that doesn't come your way, to think that we're going to force in the populating the schools is going to be problematic, unless you want to abandon the 3-foot rule. And, that this time, I will make a recommendation to the board in terms of how to handle that, but we haven't done that. And that's my worry for next year. Yeah, you're going to increase your numbers if you don't get the money, but if you're under the pandemic, particularly for K-8, you might be okay for the high school, it looks like, but K-8, it's going to be a challenge to all of us to try to do that. So I just want you to be, I'm sure you're aware of it. Thanks, Rich.
Okay. Thank you all for attending the workshop. Courtney and everyone that was affiliated with putting the workshop together. Okay. Yeah. For putting the workshop together. I want to thank you, the committee, and Al Russo is our backup chairperson for this committee. And I just want to thank all the members that attended the workshop. So if there's no other questions that anyone would like to say, I would like a motion to adjourn the meeting, the workshop.
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Janelli, seconded by
I'll second.
Kate. Oh, Kate, I forgot. Did you get I forgot to do the roll. But we know who was here.